Yeah.
I was wondering, how do you find space, or what are your strategies for finding space for personal storytelling in these large blockbuster kinds of stories?
Well, that's actually the big challenge. I mean, for me, are there any sort of aspiring writers in here for comics? Yeah? Yeah, I love teaching, honestly. This is the first semester coming up that I can't. I'm going to try and do it the semester after, but I teach, I taught writing, fiction writing, and then I taught comics writing in a couple places in the undergrad and in the grad program. And my favorite thing is sort of trying to explain writing iconic superhero characters and how it's different than writing your own stuff, you know? And the thing is, like, the way that it's different is that you have to make it the same as writing your own stuff. So what I had to learn, like, the big challenge is basically, like, let's say you have Batman, right? Everybody has, like, a dream Batman story, and you know, and something they've always wanted to tell with Batman or whatever. But the challenge is for you to go in there and make it incredibly personal and make it the same kind of thing that you would do when you create your own book, while still staying true to the core, you know, of Batman. And one of the fun things I like to do with students, honestly, is to do an exercise where I say, you know, what's a villain you want to see in Batman, for example? Is there one? For real. Is there one that you're dying to see, anyone?
Crazy cool. Mr. Freeze.
Sinisterless. Space. Go back to space.
Mr.
What?
Freeze.
Mr. Freeze. Yeah, sure, okay, Mr. Freeze. Someone said Mr. Freeze. Who said that? Okay, so why do you want to see Mr. Freeze? What do you like about him?
Well, when I think about it, I think of Paul Dini's from the cartoon series about his love story between him and his wife.
And his wife, right? Okay, so let's try and build a story for a second that speaks to that makes it personal for you, that isn't just sort of fan fiction for it, right? So let's say what you love about Mr. Freeze is his relationship to his wife, right? Or Nora.
Right.
So what's a way then of telling a story that gets at the stuff that you find most interesting in a way that expresses both your fears about it and your fantasies about it? So for me, if let's flip it, I don't want to put you on the spot and be like, put you on the couch, right? But I can put myself on the couch about it and tell you, and this is a total spoiler, but I have an idea for a short Mr. Freeze story, and I am attracted to some of the same stuff that you are, with him, this sense of obsession about this lost love. And I think the thing that fascinates me about Mr. Freeze is you have to unpack it. And what fascinates me is this sense that he lives in the cold, and he's obsessed with the cold, and he is a walking embodiment of all things frozen. And at the same time, all he wants is to thaw this woman out from the past, and whether or not she loves him or he loves her, it doesn't matter. It's this obsessive thing where someone is lost to the element that he lives in all the time. So what I would try and do is then find a story, well, how do I get to that in a way that speaks to if it's just a Mr. Freeze story and he's the main character, well, what if I did something where he can thaw out other people, but he can't thaw out his wife because she still has this disease that can't be cured. But he does it almost to thaw people out as a way of proving he'll eventually get to do that for her. And then he has a gang of people from different eras that he thaws out from different cryobanks. And then he has this whole that he can always put back on ice, so they have to do what he wants. And so what I'm saying is what you try and do is you try and pick apart what you find interesting about that villain, right? So Joker, for me, the reason he's so interesting is because he's like the devil in my mind, where he looks at you and he says to you, I know what you're most afraid is true about yourself, and I'm going to prove to you why that's true and why you're weak, and I'm going to tempt you with it, and I'm going to make a horrifying challenge, and I'm going to laugh at you the whole time. And that's really scary. And for me, that's why he's so interesting to pit against Batman, isn't because I like writing him because he's fun. He is fun. It's like monstrous fun. But it's because it cuts to the stuff that allows me to get to the things that I think are most vulnerable and heroic about Bruce, right? When Joker says to him, all you want is to be immortal. It's why you became Batman. You want to escape the possibility of getting old and dying, you know, and disappearing the way your parents did or whatever. Why? That's what I give you. I let you do that. You know, so deep down, you really want all your human allies dead. You don't want to be reminded that you're human, so come with me. And those kinds of things, they allow you to write the character like it's a creator own. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that's the biggest challenge, honestly, writing Superman, Batman, those characters, is to take the character and say to yourself, I have to make this the same fear, like driven by the same fears and fantasies I use in my own work. And there's a reason I'm attracted to these characters that has the same DNA as those kinds of concerns. Meaning, you're not just taking the character and trying to inject yourself into it. When that happens, it doesn't work. You know, when you read a story where it's like that could be any superhero, it's just your interest in it. you try to assume that I love Batman, I've always loved Batman, he's always been my favorite character. The reason for me is that I always have had tremendous anxiety about time passing. Ever since I was a kid, I've always had this tremendous anxiety about things going too fast and hanging on to things and all of that. And what appeals to me about Batman in a deep way is the sense that he's human, he's vulnerable, right? He's totally immortal. He doesn't have any superpowers. The city will be there long after he's gone, And in that way, that's what drives our whole run in terms of my personal sort of writing. Court of Owls is basically the city saying, I've been here before you and I'll be here after you, exist for one moment in time, and you can never know me the way you want to know me. Joker is saying, you wanted to be immortal, it's why you got into it. Just do it, just burn them all, or come with me, and you'll forget that you were ever human, and you'll escape the dirt and gravity, and you'll be forever, emblazoned on shields and legends, and you'll be in the folktales. And Zero Year was about revisiting all of that stuff and having him accept the fact that he was going to do this forever, and it would never get any better in some ways. And then Endgame, which we're doing next, is entirely about the same stuff. It's about him learning there's only a couple ways to cope with his own mortality, and part of it is about rebirth and sort of accepting the fact that things have to change sometimes. So for me, that I understand that's what appeals to me about Batman and Bruce, and that's what Dick Grayson had a whole different set of things that appealed to me. But that's what appeals to me about each villain in different ways. Like, why do I like Poison Ivy, or why do I like Catwoman? Because they tease out these particular fears in Bruce, and I relate to those fears. And that's how I try and do it. And what I would encourage you, if you're an aspiring writer, try and take the time to figure out why you like the villains you like, and what is it that really gets under your skin about them on a scary personal level for you. Why is Joker exciting to you? Why is Mr. Freeze, or why is Catwoman, or why is Poison Ivy, or why is Two-Face? What is it that speaks to the thing that you would write if you did create your own stuff in Batman? Do you know what I mean? You have to write Batman like you made him up, and if you don't, you just get paralyzed by the fact that everybody you love has written him better than you probably ever will. So that's the big challenge. Yeah?
Two questions. First one is, does it ever get frustrating that you are trying to do something that is somewhat like create your own story, while you also have to deal with all the DC continuity and all these characters and stuff? Does that ever get frustrating?
Yeah, he asked if it's frustrating dealing with continuity when you're trying to sort of do stories that you care about that are almost create your own. Yeah, it does sometimes, but the truth is, as weird as it sounds, I'm not trying to be rosy. We're honestly good friends in the Bat world. Like Gail is a friend, and Pete Tomasi is a friend, and the people on Eternal are friends, and they were supportive of me coming up. And the way that I try and not run that line, but maybe drive it a little bit with Batman, is to make sure we all talk about what we're doing in the books and know what each other is doing, and then give each other enough room to make each book special and different from one another, so we don't step on each other's toes. So they know which villains I'm using in Endgame and what superheroes I'm using in that story, and then they steer clear of them. And I know what villains they're using, and we steer clear of each other that way, and try and give each other enough berth. So it hasn't been a problem, honestly. I've been very lucky. I know you hear a lot of stuff about editorial interference and all that stuff and everything, and those things exist, and it does happen. But I've been lucky. I had a couple good editors. Mike Martz really protected me when I first came in from a lot of interference. He let me get Jock on Detective, right? that's not a decent choice. I won't say who was on the book. Actually, it's a big superstar Marvel artist, actually. Very, from the 90s and early 2000s, like a great guy who I love, but more of a Spider-Man type artist. And that was on the book, and I was like nobody, and they gave me Detective, and I was like, I think I'd really like to use Jock, and they were like, yeah? Okay, I'll tell you what. They were like, Mike was like, you're going to tell this guy he's not in the book, and you're going to get Jock for it? I was like, I think that's the way to go. And he was like, I'll tell you what, if you get Jock to do it, because he knew Jock had a lot of obligations, then you can have him. And I was like, okay, all right, you know what, I'm going to try. So I knew Jock was going to San Diego, and so was Francesco Francavilla, and I didn't know them, I just knew them peripherally, and I was like, I'm going to go there, and I'm going to win him over. So I went there, and I met him in a pub, because he was like, I'm interested in Batman, but I have a lot on my plate. And I was under the impression that if he's this big Englishman, and I was like, if I can't keep up with him like having a beer, he's gonna think I'm a total pussy and not do Batman with me. I have to do this. And we were drinking, I was telling him the story, and I'm a smaller man than he is, drinking. And finally he was like, I'm in, I love it. And I was like, yes. And I went home and I typed to Mike Martz, I was like, guess what, Martz? Jock is in. I was like, oh, yeah, there you go. And it was great. And then they let me use him and Francesco and bring back James Jr. And I don't know what it is. They've just always, maybe I just got a lucky roll of the dice, but I've had people around, and now Mark protects me. And now I don't really need protection. I mean, me and Craig, honestly, they give us a very wide swath, and they let us do what we want on the book pretty much. So it hasn't been frustrating in that regard, the continuity stuff or the editorial stuff. I mean, and that's the truth. I'm not trying to do PR for DC. It just has been for me personally. So, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about American Vampire?
Yeah, sure. What aspect of it?
Like, in a summarized version. Where did you come up with the idea of Skinner Sweet, and where's the book going?
Yeah, well, American Vampire, if you guys are reading it, for me, that's the series that got me into comics.
Comic out there.
Oh, thank you. Well, the idea came, I was down in a model store, actually, down in the West Village, and I was buying a birthday gift for my friend. And he was a big Doctor Who fan, and I went in this model store, and I was looking for Doctor Who stuff. And I saw a little Confederate soldier that was a zombie one, and it just sparked this idea where I was like, that's very American. And I kept thinking it was at the time when there were all these vampire things out. And I always love vampires, but my vampires are like Near Dark and Salem's Lot and Lost Boys and vampires that are indigenous to this country in the way that vampires at that time always seemed like they were in like a leather jacket going to like some club in the sewers. It was like super cool. You know what I mean? And like, hey, why are you going to rave in the sewers? You're a vampire. You have better things to do. But like it was always, they're always so fashionable and like and exotic, and I like them for the opposite reason. I mean, what's exciting about classic monsters to me personally is that they're enduringly terrifying because they go back to the things I was saying earlier about having anxiety about getting older and dying and time passing you by. They're each a representation, at least in some way to me, of something you find safety in or love, like a neighbor, a loved one, a family member, or yourself, your own body, being taken away and being turned into a murderous, terrible thing that's unrecognizable. So a werewolf, right? You get bitten and you can't help yourself. You turn into a monster, a zombie. You come back and you're trying to eat your family. A vampire technically should be the same thing, where you come up out of the ground and you're scratching at someone's window to kill them, and they're your best friend, like Ralphie Glick. I mean, that stuff is scary. So for me, I saw that statue and I was like, how come there's no vampire that's like all American? And it just hit me. Honestly, I was like, well, why don't I make a new vampire that has powers and weaknesses that are indigenous to this country, and use characters that are kind of iconic to American culture, cowboys and flappers and all that kind of stuff, and it would give me a chance to go through all this Americana and American history I love, and turn figures from history and sort of cultural sort of, stereotypes into these kind of layered, more monstrous characters. So that was really exciting for it, And then I pitched it. What happened was I did a short story. Somebody brought up this book today, actually. I was in the short. I was doing prose, and I did a short story on a lark on the side for this collection that was basically like literary writers make up superhero stories. And at the time, I was working in prose, and I had this forgive me if you've heard me talk about this. I don't want to be repetitive, so just boo me if you've heard this story before. But I was working in books, and I'd always wanted to be in comics, but I just sort of didn't know how to get into comics, and I fell in love with writing fiction. And I went to graduate school for fiction after working in Disney World for a year and kind of roaming around and all this stuff. And I got a very nice book deal right out of grad school, and it was for a short story collection, and it was for a novel that was unwritten. And at the time, I was like, great, this is so awesome, and there's all this money coming as soon as I hand in this novel. But we don't realize is they have to approve the novel. And if they don't like it, they're not going to give you that money. And I just totally didn't understand. And so the market contracted right while I was working on this novel, and I had success with the short stories. Then I started handing in the novel as I had proposed it, and they were like, you know what, the market's changed. Your novel's about a little barnstormer. It was like a guy, in a plane, literally in a wooden plane flying across the country in the early teens. It was like, it's not like Michael Bay. It's not that. And the sense was that it wasn't going to make back the money they would give me if they gave me what they were supposed to. And I realized it was this terrible relationship all of a sudden, and I was going to keep writing this book, and it would never come out. And so I started doing things on the side, and my wife was just like, why are you writing a superhero story? It pays $200. I was like, because it's really fun, and I hate going to work and working on this novel. It's never going to come out. And so the story was in this collection, and they did a reading for the collection, and I went. It was a few of us went and read our stories, and these two editors from Comic World. It makes you feel like there's no way into the industry that makes any sense, but these two editors, Mark Doyle and Janine Schaefer, were at the reading, and they got up afterwards, and they were like, they came up to me, and they were like, a lot of the stories were really funny. They were like about a superhero named like the Meerkat, you know, or another one was about like a superhero support group where it was like they had terrible powers, and so like one guy's power, the whole power was like he never had to go to the bathroom. He was just like, where does it all go, you know? And that was like, mine was really grim. It was about like a guy who's like irradiated and becomes like a supervillain and bikini tall tests in the 50s. And by the way, you know who illustrated it? It's pretty, I went back and looked because there's like little illustrations in it. It was Chris Burnham before he was Chris Burnham. Wow. Yeah, brand new. I know. I saw it because we both got into the industry, and I was like, wait a minute. You illustrated my little story. And he's like, yeah. And he was on ink, and I was like, oh my god, you know, it's awesome. We were just hanging out last night. He's like, he's a good friend now. But anyway, they came to this reading, and they were like, are you serious about comics, any of you? And I was like, yeah, I have comics in my bag. And I had all the Secret Invasion stuff and everything at the time. And yeah, I know. Sorry, DC. But they let me pitch. You know, Janine first said, do you want to pitch? And Mark said, do you want to pitch? And I did. I pitched a few things for Marvel. And again, my wife was like, why are you pitching for this stuff? It pays nothing. And you just get this book done, and they approve it. And I was like, you know why? Because I go to work miserable writing this book. I'm like, drinking too much. I hate it. I've never been depressed like writing before. I have a job I should like, right? I'm paid to write. And I hate this book because it'll never be what they want it to be, and they're going to keep rejecting it, and I'm miserable. So she was like, okay, I'll tell you what, let's take out another loan, and you pitch for real. Like, go in to meet Mark Doyle and pitch him a real series that will preclude you writing this book. And I was like, okay, you know, and so she's been great about that. I'll never forget that she was that supportive. Yeah, well, she is. And so I went, and I did, and I pitched American Vampire to Mark, along with a couple other small ideas, but that was my big idea. That was like, this is my ongoing, and Mark really liked it. And the funniest thing is I didn't realize the two of them were on a date. And now they're married and have a kid, which I always joke is like the great DC Marvel crossover. You know, I would always be like, wait a minute, you know what, my editor at Marvel, like, she never calls me back. And then she would call back, you know, 5 seconds later.